Welcome to my channel, and in this video I'm going to be doing something that I don't normally do. This is the 8th take of this video, and the reason why I've had to do 8 takes is because I'm really uncomfortable about this particular video. Normally I talk about cross-examination techniques, examination-in-chief techniques, courtroom techniques, but today I'm going to be sharing some of my personal mistakes and embarrassing moments that have happened to me in the courtroom. So I've made my tea because I'm going to need it. And let me explain why I felt the need to make this video. It occurs to me that often people who seek advocates in court don't realise that it's taken a lot for those advocates to get to their level of competence, to become experts in advocacy skills, for example. It didn't just happen to them. They've made lots of mistakes along the way. They've experienced lots of humiliating things in and outside of the courtroom before they got to their level of expertise. And so I really wanted to reassure you that if you are not at the level of the advocates that you see in court yet, not to worry about it. We all make mistakes. We all experience humiliating things in the courtroom. And so I thought it would be reassuring to you watching this, if you are a lawyer or if you are a student who is going to conduct advocacy in the future, that you don't feel discouraged if you're not happy with your level of advocacy ability at the moment. We've all been there. And so I thought I would share some of my humiliating experiences and some of my mistakes. So let's start then with, well, how many mistakes do I want to share? I don't want to make this video too long, so I'll share, I think, 5 of my humiliating experiences and mistakes. So let's start with mistake number 1. I was instructed to represent somebody who had been charged with an offence of fraud. And the allegation was that she had impersonated somebody, she had assumed this person's identity, and she had taken out credit cards and loans in this person's name. Let's call this person Jane Doe. So the complainant, the victim, was Jane Doe. My client had assumed Jane Doe's identity. So I went to court to represent the fake Jane Doe, and I hadn't met her before, so I had to call her name. This was in the magistrate's court. So I go into the court building and I shout out, Jane Doe, Jane Doe. And this person comes up to me. She says, I'm Jane Doe. And I said, nice to meet you. I'm going to be your barrister today in court. I'd like to just have a brief discussion with you before we go into court. So we find a quiet area and I'm talking to Jane Doe. And I said to her, look, this is what's going to happen in court. And I understand that, this is your first time. And then during the discussion, Jane Doe says to me, I'm Jane Doe. I said, yes, I know you're Jane Doe. She said, no, I'm the real Jane Doe. I had been talking to the victim, not the defendant. And my mouth just opened and I said, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I had to then immediately go to my opponent, the prosecutor, to explain what had happened and to reassure her that I had not obtained any information that I should not have been in possession of and that I had not divulged any confidential information. I then found the real Jane Doe, explained to her what had happened, and she was content for me to continue representing her. And yeah, it was very embarrassing and I could have found myself in all sorts of ethical difficulties. Yeah, so what's the lesson? The lesson is, I guess, that yes, of course, we all make mistakes, but I could have avoided that mistake by establishing exactly who the person was that I was speaking to before I actually spoke to her. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two is more humorous than that, I think. And I was involved in a trial. It was a multi-hander. In other words, there were several defendants involved. So I think I was last on the indictment. And I think there were 4 or 5 other defendants. So there were 4 or 5 other counsel involved in this trial. And my colleagues had spoken before me. So they had stood up and they had addressed the jury before I had, or whatever it was they were doing. I can't remember. And because I was last on the indictment, I was the last person to speak. So I was the last counsel that the jury had heard from. So it came, oh, I should first say that I was having some problems with my hair. I used to wear my hair in extensions, so I used to have plaits in my hair with added hair. And the problem with that is that my hair was quite full and quite bulky, and I had to wear a wig. So I had to wear this wig on top of my own hair, on top of its added hair. And so my wig was kind of like up here. And I was trying to pull it down before I went into the courtroom. I'm trying to pull this wig down so that it would lay flat on my head. And of course, it wasn't laying flat. Anyhow, you can guess what happened. I stood up and I did it quite dramatically. There's a fly here, sorry, that's why I'm squatting it. I stood up dramatically, and the jury are all looking at me. The jury's to my right, and they're all looking at me, waiting in anticipation to hear how I sound, to hear what I was going to say. And as I stood up, I theatrically looked down at my notes. And as I looked down, the wig fell off in front of the entire courtroom, in front of the jury. They were killing themselves laughing. My colleagues next to me were sniggering. The judge was so embarrassed for me that he couldn't even look at me. He just put his head down. I mean, the humiliation. My client, well, he was behind me, so I don't know what he was thinking or feeling, but I mean, it was just not a good look. So, yeah. It was humiliating. My client was convicted in that case, but I don't think it had anything to do with Wiggate. So yeah, embarrassing. We move on. Oh, what's the lesson to be learned from this? Well, I didn't wear extensions after that. I wore my natural hair, so maybe that's the lesson. Don't wear extensions. Dunno. Let's move on. Calling an expert witness a liar. Oh my God. This was in my very early days of practice. I was representing a defendant. The prosecution had called an expert witness. The expert witness had given their evidence in chief. And when you cross-examine an expert, you cross-examine them on the basis of their experience, their expertise. You would cross-examine them on their findings being incorrect. Did Sonia cross-examine the witness on any of those matters? No. I stood up and I called the expert witness a liar. Why? I have no idea to this day. I have no idea why I called the poor woman a liar. This was in the magistrate's court, my early days of practice. I was sleep deprived. That's the only excuse that I can come up with. I mean, you know, in those days, I was working until 1, 2 in the morning preparing for the hearing the next day. And then I'd get up again at 5 in the morning to finish off my preparation. So I was sleep deprived. It could have been that, I don't know. My client wasn't prejudiced, I have to say, thankfully. What's the lesson to be learned from that? Do not call an expert witness a liar. And also, make sure you get enough sleep. Next, embarrassing or humiliating experience or mistake. Let's think. I'm looking at my list. Yeah, this is a good one. My client was going to be sentenced. He had pleaded guilty to an offence. I can't remember what it was. And he had told me in conference before the hearing that he had found a job on a building site and that he was going to be starting on Monday. Now, I can imagine that those of you who practice criminal law are laughing at this point because we've heard this story time and time again. So I wanted to ensure that my client would be given a non-custodial sentence. And so I wanted to be persuasive in court. And so I said to him, well, you know, what's the name of this firm that you're going to be working for? He told me, no, he didn't. He said, oh, I don't know the name of the firm, but I know the name of the boss. And I said, what's his name? I said, what's his telephone number? I phoned up the boss to verify that my client did in fact have a job that he could go to. So I phone up the man says, yeah, who's this? And I said, I'm counsel in the case of blah, 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 blah. I understand that such and such has a job with you. And this person paused. He said, yeah. And I said, and it's starting on Monday. He said, yeah. And I said, so I just wanted to confirm that with you. And he said, yeah. So I go into court and I confirm this. And the magistrates accepted what I said. But afterwards, it occurred to me that I had no idea who I was talking to. I could have been talking to my client's father. I had absolutely no idea who this man was I was talking to. What's the lesson to be learned from that? I don't really know. But I didn't make that mistake again. Let's move on. I think I'm on number 4. This is a biggie. And again, this was my very first case, actually. My very first case. I was instructed to apply for bail, and my client was accused of dealing, so possession of Class A drugs with intent to supply. And when you're new and you want to impress your instructing solicitors and the client, so I spoke with my client. He said, you've got to get me bail. I said, can you pull up a security? He said, yes. I said, how much? He said, £1,000. And I didn't realize at the time that the security had to be physically in court, but he was in custody. So anyway, I hadn't even thought this through. So he said, I can pull up a security of £1,000. So, oh God, let me drink my tea. I need my tea because this is really embarrassing. So I go into court and I make this impassioned bail application. You can trust my client with bail. He understands his obligations. He will surrender to custody at the appointed time and the appointed place. And I've been instructed that my client would consent to conditional bail, and the conditions that I seek to put forward are that he live and sleep each night at a particular address, and that he offers security in the sum of £1,000. So the magistrate then, his eyes raised, and he said, £1,000. All right, Miss Sims, we're going to grant the security of £1,000. Where is it? And I said, oh, may I take instructions? So I go and speak to my client whilst we're in court, and he said, the money's at home under my bed. I'm so desperate to get bail for this guy that I go back and I say to the magistrate, the money is in his house, it's under his bed. The magistrates, they ordered that the money be collected by my solicitor, that my solicitor goes into my client's home, retrieves the £1,000 from under his bed, and then produces it at court. Obviously, the magistrates knew that this was not going to happen. So I phone up my solicitor and I say, oh, I managed to get bail. I managed to get bail for Mr. So-and-so. And my solicitor is really shocked. And she said, well, what's the condition? And I explained that she had to go to his house. She had to let herself into this man's house. She had to go into his bedroom, look underneath the bed, and retrieve the money from underneath the bed. My client just said, hell no. No, he's going to rot in that, that jail cell. until until the end of his trial. She said, "I'm not going in a drug dealer's house to retrieve money. I don't know what's going to be in there." No, that was my very first appearance in court. The lesson that I learned was, obviously, think through any conditions that you offer to the court. Make sure that they're attainable and realistic. Okay, I think I'm on number 5. Number 5. I represented this client for a number of years, and he was a juvenile, and he always committed the same offence: twocking. So taking a vehicle without the owner's consent. He would steal cars, and the cars that he would steal were Ford Fiestas, I guess because they were easy to break into. So I represented this juvenile for years. And one day I went to court to represent him, and I was exhausted, preparing the night before into the early hours and then getting up early in the morning to continue my preparations. What happened was, we had this hearing. He said, "Miss, do you need a lift to the train station?" The train station was about a 20-minute walk from the courtroom. And I said, "Oh, that would be so nice, thank you." I got into his car. He drove me to the station. I got out of the car. I walked to the entrance of the station. I turned back to wave. And then it dawned on me. I'd been a passenger in a Ford Fiesta, and my client had no license. Had I committed a criminal offence of allowing myself to be carried in a stolen vehicle? No, I hadn't, because I didn't know it was stolen, because I wasn't thinking, because I was so tired. But yeah, my juvenile offender with no driving license in a Ford Fiesta, which I know now he couldn't possibly have owned, drove me to the station. Lesson to be learned: don't accept lifts from your clients. So those were just some of my mistakes, just some of my humiliating experiences. And I hope that you've learned from this video that we all make mistakes. We're human beings, we are not infallible. And advocacy, or being a lawyer, it's a learning curve. We're always learning from our experiences. The most important thing, though, is to ensure that the mistakes you make do not have an impact on your client. And also to learn from the mistakes, move on from the mistakes. Don't beat yourself up too much, as I did in the past. Don't beat yourself up too much. And hopefully one day you'll be able to laugh at yourself. So I hope you found this video useful. See you in the next one.